My name is Dr. Alexander Cole. Most people know me as a top-tier physician and the owner of one of the fastest-growing private hospital chains in the country, a self-made millionaire, a man who seemingly has it all: success, wealth, recognition. Yet beneath all that, I carried an emptiness no one could see, a quiet ache in my chest. The kind that success can't fill, no matter how high you climb. That night, rain lashed against the hospital windows. A cold wind howled outside while the emergency room glowed in its sterile, eerie calm. It was one of those shifts where time dragged, and the world outside felt like a distant memory. I was reviewing patient files when a new name popped up on my screen: Sophia Evans. The note beside it read, "Private concern. Sensitive case. No details. Just a quiet alert," I sighed. These were the ones I always took personally. Not because I had to, but because no one should face fear alone, especially not for something they're too ashamed to talk about. I made my way to room 204. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the figure sitting on the edge of the bed. A young woman, her long blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her fingers nervously fidgeting in her lap. She wasn't crying, but her eyes carried the weight of someone desperate to disappear. I cleared my throat gently, not wanting to startle her. "Hi, I'm Dr. Cole," I said with a warm smile. "You're safe here, Sophia. Whatever's going on, you don't have to be afraid to tell me." She looked up at me, hesitating. Her lips parted slightly, her voice barely a whisper. "I think something's wrong. An infection, maybe. I don't know, I feel embarrassed even being here." I took a seat beside her, leaning in with a kind, steady gaze. "Listen," I said softly. "You came to the right place. No one here is going to judge you, least of all me. You have my word." Her hands were cold when I gently held them, offering reassurance the only way I knew how. That small touch. Something happened in that moment. The world outside, the storm, the hospital walls, all of it faded for a heartbeat. There was something about her, a fragile honesty, a kind of vulnerability you rarely see in people anymore. I conducted the necessary exam, keeping my tone light and professional, explaining everything to her as I went. I could tell it wasn't just the physical concern bothering her. It was the weight of shame, the fear of what people might say, how society would label her. When I was finished, I looked into her eyes. "You're going to be okay, Sophia. It's nothing serious. A simple treatment, and you'll be back to yourself in no time." Tears welled up in her eyes then, but not from pain, from relief. "Thank you. I was so scared," she murmured. And just like that, I knew I wasn't just dealing with a patient. Tonight, I was meeting someone whose story mattered. The clock struck 3 a.m. by the time the paperwork was ready. Rain still hammered against the glass. I watched her sign the discharge forms with trembling hands. I hesitated a moment before speaking. "Sophia, I don't usually do this, but if you ever need anything, even just to talk, here's my personal number." She glanced up, her lips curling into the faintest smile. "Thank you, Dr. Cole." And in that instant, something inside me shifted. All the years of chasing titles, investments, and board meetings, none of it compared to the simple grace of that moment. A girl too shy to speak, now strong enough to smile. As she walked out of the room, I felt it. I'd spent my whole life building a fortune, a reputation, a name. And yet I realized, what's the point of it all if you don't have someone who sees the man behind the title? And for the first time in years, I hoped, truly hoped, that maybe this wasn't the last time I'd see her. I've never liked hospitals. The smell of antiseptic, the cold, bright lights, the hum of machines reminding you that life can slip away in a blink. I always told myself I'd stay away from them. But here I was, sitting on the edge of a hospital bed, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "My name is Sophia Evans. And I'm not like the people who usually walk through these spotless glass-paneled doors. I grew up in a tiny town most people couldn't find on a map. One grocery store, one diner, one gas station, and a lifetime of small-minded people who loved to talk about others because there was nothing better to do. I hated it there. Not because it was small, but because people like me didn't belong. I was shy. Too shy. The kind of girl who'd get tongue-tied in front of strangers, who'd rather stay home with a book than go to a party. It wasn't shyness born from innocence. It was survival. People in my town didn't like girls who asked questions, or who wanted more than a high school diploma and a ring by 19. By 17, I was working double shifts at the diner, trying to save enough to leave. My mom had died when I was 13. My father? Well, it's easier to say he was gone too, even if his body still sat in front of the TV every night. I ran away at 21. I packed a bag and left a note. Moved to a city where no one knew my name, where I could be invisible. I worked in retail, took night classes, lived in a cramped apartment that smelled like old paint and leaky pipes, and still, I felt like I was one wrong step away from everything crashing down. Then, last week, I noticed something was wrong. A personal problem, something I couldn't ignore anymore. I waited, hoping it would pass, but it didn't. I Googled symptoms at 2 a.m., made myself sick with worry, and finally, after days of debating, I found my way to the ER. When Dr. Alexander Cole walked into the room, I felt like disappearing. He wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured someone cold, rushed, maybe even dismissive. But he wasn't. He was kind, gentle in a way I wasn't used to. The way he spoke, the way he looked at me like a person, not a problem to solve. It disarmed me. I hated being vulnerable. But in that room, something in me cracked. "I think something's wrong," I'd whispered. And the way he took my hands, the warmth of his touch, it undid me. I didn't tell him everything. Not how I'd spent half my paycheck on a cab to get there. Not how I'd been hiding from the world for years. Not how I was terrified of being alone. When he said I'd be okay, it wasn't just about my health. It felt bigger than that, like he meant me. The girl no one ever noticed, no one ever asked about. And when he handed me his number, not in a weird way, but as a lifeline, I nearly cried. "Thank you, Dr. Cole." The words barely escaped my lips, because no one ever did that for me. No one saw me. I walked out into the rainy night feeling like the world had tilted. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. And for the first time since my mom died, I believed maybe, just maybe, life had a strange way of putting the right people in your path when you needed them most. I clutched his number in my palm like a secret. I wouldn't text him, of course. Not. That would be weird. I mean, he was a doctor, probably married, or dating someone perfect, rich, confident, everything I wasn't. But I'd keep the number, because it reminded me that kindness still existed, and that maybe one day I'd be brave enough to believe I deserved it. I don't know how long I stared at that little slip of paper with his number scrawled across it. Maybe hours, maybe days. It was folded neatly in my wallet, tucked between a half-used bus ticket and a loyalty card from a cafe I couldn't afford to visit anymore. Every time I reached for something, my fingers would brush against it, and every time, my stomach would flip. What was I supposed to do with it? It wasn't like I'd ever texted a doctor before, let alone one like Dr. Alexander Cole. He was different, not just because he was kind or good-looking, though he was both, but because of the way he'd made me feel that night. Seen, like I mattered, and no one had done that in a long, long time. 3 days passed. I went back to my routine. The retail job with the flickering fluorescent lights. The roommate who never spoke unless she was complaining about the dishes. The endless loop of cheap instant noodles and secondhand books. But every night when the apartment was quiet, I'd pull out his number and stare at it like it held some kind of power. I typed out a dozen messages. Hi, this is Sophia from the FAS. Just wanted to say thank you. Deleted. I'm sorry if this is weird, but you helped me more than you know. Deleted. I hope it's okay that I texted. I don't really have anyone else to talk to. Deleted. It was stupid. I mean, what was I hoping for? That he'd respond. That he'd remember me at all. He probably saw 100 patients a day. 1,000 faces, 1,000 names. I was nothing special. But something inside me, a tiny, stubborn part of my heart, wouldn't let it go. So, on the fourth night, after another long shift, and a particularly cruel comment from a customer about how I looked tired and should smile more, I did it. I typed out 2 simple words. Thank you. And hit send. I didn't expect an answer. Not right away. Maybe not ever. I set my phone down, pacing the room like a caged animal, feeling ridiculous. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. It was just a text. Just a stupid, meaningless text. But for someone like me, it wasn't meaningless. It was everything. And then, it buzzed. A message. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling as I opened it. Dr. Cole. Sophia, I'm glad you reached out. How are you feeling? I sank onto the bed, the breath leaving my lungs in a shaky exhale. He remembered me. He actually remembered me. I could have cried. We started small. A text here. A message there. He'd check in after his shifts. I'd tell him about my awful customers, my night classes, my favorite books. He told me about his long nights at the hospital, the crazy emergencies, the patients that stayed with him long after they left the ER, and somewhere in those messages, we stopped. Being doctor and patient, we became something else, something that felt dangerous, beautiful, impossible. I learned things about him too. How he'd built his hospital business from scratch. How people told him he'd never make it, that he was too young, too ambitious. How he'd lost people along the way. Sacrificed. Relationships, burnt out and broken down. But kept going because he believed in something bigger than himself. He wasn't perfect. And God, that made me like him more. He wasn't the man I'd built up in my head. He wasn't untouchable. He was human, with scars of his own. And every night, as those conversations stretched later and later, I felt myself wanting more. More words. More time. More him. But I couldn't. Could I? I mean, who was I? Just a girl with nothing. No career. No fancy apartment. No designer clothes or powerful friends. What could I possibly mean to a man like that? And yet, I knew what I felt was real. The night it happened, the night everything changed. He texted me after midnight. Dr. Cole, you know, Sophia, you're kind of my favorite part of the day. I stared at the message, my heart stuttering. No one had ever said anything like that to me. Not once. I typed a reply, my fingers trembling. You too, Alex. I don't know what made me drop the formality, but it felt right. Like we weren't pretending anymore. And when his next message came through, my whole world tilted. Alex, would it be too crazy if I asked to see you? Not as your doctor. Just me. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. I didn't have to think about it. I knew the answer. I'd known it since the night I first saw him in that hospital room. I wasn't supposed to fall for her. I'm a doctor, a man with a reputation to protect, a hospital empire to run. Every day of my life is built around control, of situations, of emotions, of outcomes. That's how I built my career. How I turned a single struggling clinic into one of the most successful private medical chains in the state. I made calculated moves. I trusted numbers, strategies, the cold certainty of facts. And then, there was Sophia Evans, the shy girl with trembling hands and eyes that carried an entire world of hurt behind them. She wasn't part of the plan. And yet, every night when my phone lit up with her messages, I felt more alive than I had in years. People, like me, aren't supposed to get attached. Not to anyone outside our circle. Not to someone so far removed from our world that it would raise eyebrows and spark headlines. But she wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. Sophia didn't care about my title, about the money, the suits, the awards, hell. She barely even knew any of it existed. She just talked to me, like a person, like a man, and God. It was addicting. I told myself it was innocent at first, a way to check on a patient who clearly needed someone to lean on, someone to remind her she mattered. But the truth? I needed her more than she needed me. Because somewhere between the hospital corridors and boardroom meetings, I'd lost myself. I'd built a kingdom but forgotten why I built it. Every day was about numbers, profit margins, expansion plans, awards. I stopped caring about years ago. I had a penthouse with a skyline view, a luxury car I barely drove, a team of people handling every detail of my life, and none of it meant a damn thing when my phone went dark and her messages stopped for the night. I remember sitting in my office one evening after a particularly brutal meeting. Investors pressuring me to sell, to cut corners, to chase more money. The kind of soulless strategy that turns hospitals into heartless machines. I ignored them, because in my pocket was a text from Sophia. Found a tiny cafe near my apartment. They sell these ridiculous oversized cupcakes. I swear they're magic. And for the first time in a long, long time, I smiled. Not a polite, PR-approved smile. A real one, because she reminded me what life was supposed to be about. Not status, not power, but small, beautiful moments, stupid cupcakes, books that made you cry, late-night talks with someone who made your heart ache in the best possible way. I knew the rules. A relationship with a former patient, even one discharged. Days ago, questionable, risky, but rules. They were made for the version of me that no longer existed, because every time she opened up about her fears, her struggles, the quiet battles she fought alone, I saw myself. I saw the kid I used to be, the one scraping together tuition money, ignored by the world, invisible to people like me. And I wanted to be the one who changed that for her, not because she needed saving, but because she deserved to be loved without conditions, without expectations, without limits. And somewhere along the way, I realized I was already in too deep. I wasn't just falling for Sophia, I'd already fallen. The night I finally typed out the message, my hands actually shook. Would it be too crazy if I asked to see you? Not as your doctor, just me. I stared at the screen, wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life, or the best decision I'd ever made. And when her reply came, "You too, Alex." Something in my chest cracked wide open. For the first time since I made my first million, since I bought my first hospital, since I earned my first headline, I felt alive. Not as Dr. Alexander Cole, CEO, but as Alex, a man chasing one girl, one moment, one chance to be more than the title he'd hidden behind for years. And I knew right then I'd risk it all for her. I almost backed out. 3 times, actually. First when I was standing in front of the mirror, trying to decide if I looked like someone worth meeting. Then again, when I ordered a cab, watching the driver icon crawl across the map toward my apartment. Like a countdown to a disaster. And finally, when I stood in front of the little cafe on Maple Street, my stomach a knot of nerves and my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. "You don't belong here." That ugly voice in my head kept whispering. "What's a guy like him going to see in a girl like you?" But then my phone buzzed. "Alex, I'm here. outside, wearing a gray jacket, and possibly regretting my terrible choice of tie. And just like that, I smiled, because only he would say something like that. And for a second, just a second, I wasn't scared. I stepped outside, scanning the tiny crowd. My fingers were ice cold despite the soft warmth of the evening. The sky was streaked with pink and orange, the air thick with the scent of coffee and warm pastries. And then I saw him, leaning against a street lamp, hands in his pockets, hair slightly tousled, like he'd run his fingers through it one too many times. The same kind, steady eyes I remembered from that hospital room, but softer now, less guarded. He wasn't my doctor anymore. He was Alex. And in that moment, I didn't care about his money, his title, or the way people slowed down to look at him like he was something out of a magazine. I cared about the way he smiled when he saw me, like I was the only person on the street. Hey. His voice was warm, familiar, and it melted a piece of ice in my chest I didn't even know was there. I laughed nervously. Hi. Neither of us spoke for a beat too long. Just standing. There, two people who'd built entire conversations through screens now suddenly uncertain in real life. He scratched the back of his neck. You okay? And for the first time in years, I told the truth. Yeah, nervous, but glad I came. His smile widened. Me too. We walked to the cafe together. He opened the door for me. Old school, polite in a way guys in the city forgot how to be. Inside, the place smelled like vanilla and fresh coffee beans. A tiny shop with mismatched chairs and fairy lights strung across the ceiling. We ordered oversized cupcakes, mine chocolate, his something ridiculously fancy with lavender in it, and sat by the window. And for the first time since my mom died, since I left my town, since I decided the world was safer when you stayed invisible, I didn't feel alone. We talked about everything and nothing, about his terrible tie, my awful job, the books we loved, the songs that broke our hearts, and in between, the heavy. Silences weren't awkward. They were easy, comfortable. At one point I caught him watching me, not in a creepy, predatory way, in a way that made me feel seen, like I was a person worth looking at. And it scared me, because feelings like that, they came with consequences. But then he reached across the table, fingers brushing mine, and I felt something spark, something real. I don't want to scare you off, he said quietly, but I haven't felt like this in a long time. I swallowed, hard, my throat tight. Me neither, and that was it. No grand declarations, no world-shattering confessions, just two people who'd been carrying too much alone for too long, finally finding someone to set a little of it down with. When the night ended, he walked me to the corner. Neither of us wanted to leave. Neither of us said it, but we both felt it. He hesitated, then leaned down, brushing a soft, lingering kiss against my cheek. Thank you for tonight, he murmured. And when he stepped back, his eyes holding mine, I realized it wasn't just a first date. It was the start of something I never thought I'd have. Something real. Something mine. Sophia, if someone had told me a month ago that I'd be standing on the balcony of a millionaire's penthouse, staring out at a skyline glittering like 1,000 tiny promises, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't want it, but because I didn't believe people like me got moments like this. And yet, here I was, wrapped in one of his jackets because I'd forgotten mine, leaning against the railing while the city hummed below us. His place was nothing like I imagined. Sure, it was beautiful. Modern lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture that probably cost more than my yearly rent. But it wasn't cold. It wasn't empty. It was his. Full of little things I recognized from our late-night talks. The stupid mug shaped like a cat's face, the old vinyl record player in the corner. A stack of worn medical books and dog-eared paperbacks he swore he'd never get rid of. And him. standing there beside me, looking at me like I was something rare, like I was something worth keeping. And for the first time in my life, I let myself believe it. "I know this isn't easy," he said, his voice low, careful. "For you. For me." I nodded, the weight of it all sitting heavy between us. The risk was real. People would talk. His hospital board would flip. The press would twist it into something it wasn't. And me? I wasn't sure I could survive the fallout. But when he reached for my hand, lacing our fingers together, none of it mattered. "I don't care about them," I whispered. And it was true. Because this, whatever it was, however messy and complicated, was the first thing in years that made me feel alive. "Alex, I've made 1,000 deals in my life. Negotiated hospital contracts, outbid ruthless investors, navigated legal threats and corporate espionage. But nothing, not a single boardroom war, terrified me like this moment. Because Sophia Evans wasn't a business move. She wasn't a calculated risk. She was a leap, and I'd never been good at those. But watching her out there on my balcony, hair catching the breeze, a light in her eyes I hadn't seen since the night at the cafe, I knew I'd burn down my whole empire before I let her slip away. "I've spent my life chasing things I thought would matter," I told her quietly, "but none of it felt like this. None of it felt like you." She blinked, a tear catching on her lashes. "I don't want to be a scandal," she said. "I don't want to ruin your world." "Then don't. Change it with me." Because that's what it was. Not a scandal, not a mistake, a shift, a chance to build something better. Not the kind of world ruled by money and power, but one where people could matter again. Where a shy girl who walked into an ER one night could rewrite the rules of what a man like me thought love was supposed to look like. "Sophia," I let out a shaky breath, my heart racing. "You sure you're ready for this?" He smiled. That crooked, impossible grin I'd memorized in my dreams. "I wasn't ready for you, and I don't think I'll ever be. But I want you anyway." And then he kissed me. Soft, certain, the kind of kiss that told a story I didn't need words for. A promise, a risk worth taking, a future neither of us planned for, but both of us needed more than air. Epilogue. They talked about us, of course, whispers in hospital halls, articles with cheap headlines, people assuming I was chasing money, and him chasing a secret thrill. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know about the cafe nights, the vinyl records, the stupid cat mug, the way we both stitched each other back together, piece by fragile piece. And we didn't owe them the truth, because the only thing that mattered was the way he looked at me, like a man who'd spent his life conquering cities, only to realize the greatest thing he'd ever win was a shy girl who never thought she was worth noticing. And the way I felt every time his hand found mine, like maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found home.